A very good evening to one and all. I welcome all the people who have logged in for today's webinar. I'm Dr. Kritika Devi, President of International Fertility Research Foundation, founded by Dr. Pandian and Dr. Radha Pandian. The main objective of our organization is to promote research and share knowledge. And we have been doing this webinar on a monthly basis on every month, first Friday, 9 p.m. And it's a unique time compared to all other webinars. It's easier to remember. So today we have a very interesting topic and an interesting speaker also, multifaceted speaker, Dr. Rajvi, who's going to talk about whether COVID will affect our fertility. And I know COVID is a burning topic today and we are more concerned about life and death, but I'm sure we got to live with it. And in future, fertility also will take an important angle. And we have to answer our patients' queries. So for that, we have to first understand, and this is just a year-old disease. So for us to understand what its effect on fertility, I think today's webinar will be of great help. And for our session today, we have as chairpersons, my teacher and mentor, Dr. Radha Pandian, and my colleague, Dr. Madhupriya. Dr. Radha Pandian had been not only for me, for a lot of budding gynecologists, they've been instrumental in teaching them reproductive medicine. And she has been our advisor of our organization. She's a co-founder of the Department of Andrology and Reproductive Medicine. I would say the banyan tree, where a lot of birds had come out from that. And she's an active participant of the team in IVF and birth of Asia's first IVF twins born using frozen spermatozoa way back in 1992. And she has presented the world's first report on cryopreservation of testicular tissue at Vancouver, Canada, way back in 1997. As I told you, she's actively involved in teaching and training gynecologists in reproductive medicine. And she has got multiple research publications to her credit. She has authored various chapters also. Dr. Madhupriya, she is a graduate from Tanjore Medical College. She has done a DNB from Apollo Hospitals. She has also got trained in gynec laparoscopy from Apollo Hospitals and also from Kiel, Germany. She had done a fellowship in reproductive medicine from the prestigious M Hospital, Chennai. She has won the Best Paper Awards in various conferences, right from OXY to UAUSAR of 2018. She has a lot of publications to her credit. She has also authored a book about intrauterine insemination. And I understand her special interest is giving a genetic child for women with poor ovarian reserve. And she's also interested in oncofertility. Now, I welcome Dr. Madhupriya to introduce the speaker of the day, Dr. Rajvi. Over to you, Dr. Madhupriya.
Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction. And now I take whole pleasure in introducing the speaker for the day. Working in the field of IVF for more than over 3 decades, Rajvi H. Mehta is presently the consultant at Trivecta Biomed and Cooper Surgicals India. To her credit, she's been an executive member of the Academy of Clinical Embryologists. She's been the convener of IFS SIG on holistic medicine. She's been the recipient of prestigious Champion of ESAR and President Commendation Award of ESAR. We welcome you, madam, the multifaceted personality, to go ahead with today's topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Madhupriya. And I thank the International Fertility Research Foundation, Dr. Kritika Devi, Dr. Pandian, Dr. Radha Pandian for inviting me. And it's indeed a pleasure for me to talk on this interesting topic on the impact of the pandemic on fertility and fertility treatments. So we'll just start my presentation. The screen is visible? Yeah. So it's now nearly 15 months since we have been dealing with the pandemic. Initially, when we heard about this and there was the initial lockdown, everybody was quite a great concern of what's going to happen. So fertility was the last thing on the mind of anybody. I mean, there were a few cases that needed to be completed that were done, and most of the ART clinics came to a near standstill. The concerns, especially where the cases were rising, maybe in places where there were not many cases, the ART treatments and infertility treatments continued. And at that point of time, so I'm going back to say March, April, May 2020, the major concern was whether we would have patients who would be carriers or whether the staff would be carriers. One never knew when they would get infected, whether they would transmit the disease or the virus to other patients, whether they are in the clinic. And there was a lot of ambiguity, concern of what's going to happen. Again, at that point of time, we had no clue whether this virus would have any effect on the gametes and embryos. And at that point of time, we were also concerned about the embryonic development. But the major concern was that we needed all the healthcare workers, we needed all the hospital beds. So one did not want to take up procedures which were not absolutely essential. And ART was definitely not an essential procedure. And that is the reason in most cases, most of the cases were postponed. Also, we needed all the doctors available, and there was a possible concern about the shortage of PPE kits. Everything was unknown, and in that situation, ART took a complete backseat. And also, we were not as much worried about the infection of the gametes and the embryos in the lab, because we had a system in place. You would have the trial testing, you would find out whether the patients or the couples had traveled anywhere, and even the few cases that were being treated for ART, they were tested. And we had this protocol developed by ISHRE and the ASRM, and then our professional bodies or ISAR, IFS, and ACE. And we had a sort of a system in place, and the whole concern was prioritization of treatment. So primarily it was the cases when we had to do the preservation of gametes when people were undergoing oncotherapy, or in cases of low AMH or the older age group, that the OM pickup was done and then cryopreservation was done. Our other major concern was what if any of the staff got infected, because not all ART clinics have an abundance of staff. For example, there are many clinics in the country who work with one embryologist, or there is one embryologist supporting a couple of clinics. And what if that person gets into quarantine? So our concerns at that point of time, say I would say about a year ago, were totally different. And as time went by, we sort of have started learning that while the pandemic is on, we still need to continue doing our work as much as possible. Today, after nearly a year, the way we look at things are slightly different. I mean, yes, infertility is not a life-threatening disease. It need not be treated immediately. But then how long can one delay treatment? I mean, we can't tell the couple that, okay, we'll wait for the pandemic to end, and when everything is fine, we come back for treatment. That's just not possible, because all we're doing is adding on anxiety to the couples. So treatment needs to go on, and one will need to decide, who are the cases in which we treat. Our next concern is whether this COVID would affect the reproductive system. Now, one would say that it is a disease of the respiratory system, it's very clear, but we know that it has been affecting many systems of the body. Sometimes it's direct because the virus directly acts on certain systems of the body, and sometimes it's an indirect effect. So today we do know that one is because of the multiplication of the virus, the effect is there. The second we know is because of the immune reaction that response that is there. So, we got to know about the cytokine storm and all the problems that are associated with the cardiovascular system. And in addition, there could be an indirect effect post because of the medication. So one doesn't really know whether it has any impact on the reproductive system. The next question is, does it affect the quality of the gametes, or does it even affect the quantity of gametes? So we need to see if there's any data coming in over the year where we get to know whether it's affecting the gamete quantity and quality, and also their embryonic development if we do an ART. And also if a person does get infected, then what is the effect post the infection on the reproductive system, on the gametes? Is it long lasting or is there no effect? And all these questions help us to determine, to take some decisions on the fertility treatment. So if we go back, I mean, we believe in evidence, and we cannot come to decision based on one case report or some observations, because observations have their role, but on the long term we cannot go by observations, which can be a very subjective interpretation. So if we look over the year, what are the number of publications that are coming in? So if we look in the 2020, so we are basically talking of 6 to 7 months of 2020 and about 6 months of 2021, we find that there is nearly the equal number of papers. Nearly we are closing in 2021 with the papers on COVID and fertility. If you look at the number of papers on sperms and oocytes, naturally we are having less papers published on oocytes because it's very difficult to really study the effect. If you're looking at the keywords of embryos, we see that we're getting more and more studies. Even blastocysts, there are studies which have done, which look at the impact of the SARS-CoV-2 on the blastocysts. And if you look at IVF also, there are a few studies coming in. So yes, there is a lot of literature from which we can improve our understanding of the impact of the SARS-CoV-2 virus infection and fertility. However, unlike any other cases where we do, a study of the different publications and come to certain conclusions which help us in taking decisions, in this case, it's not very easy to come to decision based on the publications. Now, the reasons that we were, as I said, why are we concerned with fertility and SARS-CoV-2? It's after all, it's a virus which is affecting the respiratory system. Well, it could be the virus itself, or I said the treatments that could affect. We definitely know it affects the respiratory system. It affects the cardiovascular system. There are reports of it acting on the digestive system. And there are even now reports of affecting the cognitive functions later on in time in some people who have been infected with COVID. Sometimes the patient goes home treated, so-called healthy, and a couple of months later, they'll end up with certain health issues. So we are still fumbling and trying to understand what the effect of the viral infection is. Another concern is that we know that the SARS-CoV-2 virus binds to cells through the ACE2 and other viral receptors. And why we are concerned is because we do know that these ACE2 receptors to which the viral spike protein can bind is present on Sertoli and Leydig cells. So if there are receptors there, and if by I cannot really comprehend how the virus would reach there, but if it would, then it would surely bind to these receptors, and we can not really be, we would get quite concerned about its impact on these cells and the functions of these cells. To add on, we know that the transmembrane protease serine, which is a protein which is involved in the binding of the spike protein, the viral spike protein to its receptors, and its further processing is present on the sperm plasma membrane, which means that if the virus gains entry and binds to the sperm, then it can gain entry into the sperm. So this is something which is theoretical. And there are certain studies which talk about the presence of ACE2 also on the zygotes and blastocysts. So if there is any kind of contamination or the presence of the virus in and around the zygotes, then theoretically there is a risk of them infecting them. So let's see what the literature has to say about it. Now today, as I said, we have so many studies, but it is very, very difficult to make sense of these studies. We cannot just look at the data and come to conclusions, because first and foremost one needs to know when these studies were done, and most of these would obviously be retrospective studies, and because the treatment given, our understanding had changed. So if there is a studies coming in the early 2020, what treatment was meted out in say March, April, May of 2020, and the kind of treatment which is given now would be very different, as our understanding of COVID has improved quite a lot. And therefore, the impact of COVID on any system would be different from the studies done then and now. Secondly, when we are looking at COVID, we know that there can be various categories of patients. These are the asymptomatic patients who have incidentally tested positive. People are planning to travel, or they're just exposed, and they do an RT-PCR and they find that they're positive, but they're asymptomatic. or a family member has been infected, or somebody they knew and had been in contact has been infected, they find themselves to be positive, but they are asymptomatic. Then there are those who have a mild infection, maybe they just have some very superficial symptoms, which are just quarantined at home. Then there are some with moderate, and then there are some who need hospitalization. So when we look at the effect on any physiological system, we need to take into consideration the different stages of the disease and what stage that individual is. To add on, we also have to consider the comorbidities of the patient, because that the intensity of the disease plus comorbidity would have a different impact. Also the kind of complications. So sometimes it's not just the infection, but it's the complications that are creating problems. So that also needs to be taken into consideration. Now the type of treatment. I mean, earlier the treatment was, a mix of vitamins and a lot of oxygen and ventilator support. Then we've got remdesivir and antivirals. Then there were steroids that came in. So one can see the kind of treatments are also being altered. So that also needs to be taken into consideration, what kind of treatment was meted out to the patient. Again, when we're looking at fertility markers, whether we are looking at semen analysis, the sperm count, or we're looking at specific hormone parameters, how soon were they measured once the patient was detected positive? So, and how long was the patient positive? So there are so many confounding factors, and I would say possibly another situation where we have more variables, and this is the whole ART system itself, where we are having so many variables. So to make sense of all these variables with its impact makes it very challenging. And now, of course, it's good that we have vaccinations, but we do know that individuals also get infected post-vaccination. In most cases, the infection is not so severe, but still they do get infected. So does it make a difference post-infection, post-vaccination infection? And now we are seeing variants coming in of the virus. So all these things make it very, very difficult to really understand the impact of the viral infection or the disease on fertility. So I'm just going to run through some studies that have been done. The limitations I wouldn't say they are limitations, but the limited information that they have given us now. In some cases, it gives us confidence. In some cases, it gives us some food for thought. Now, just April this year, we had this report coming in where they were looking for the presence of virus in men who had moderate COVID but were not hospitalized, and they did not detect the virus in the semen sample. Now, when was the analysis done? Well, in these cases, they did the semen analysis anywhere between 1 day to 28 days. And on a median, the semen analysis was 6 days after a positive RT-PCR test. So in this particular case, 18 men with moderate COVID, there was no signs of the virus being present in the semen sample, which tells us that even if you have the receptor or on the sperms, well, if there is no virus in the semen sample, then we don't need to worry of its impact on the sperms. In another study reported in June, they studied about 23 men. And in this case, the semen analysis was done nearly after a month, 32 days after the diagnosis of by an RT-PCR positive. And 12 of these patients also had a positive RT-PCR at the time of semen analysis, but again, they did not detect any virus in this presence in the semen. So all in all, it showed that yes, although theoretically it can infect the Leydig cells and the Sertoli cells and the reproductive system, the male reproductive system, we do not see the presence of the virus in semen sample. However, there was a paper that came in March this year, which was, I would say, a much detailed study. Obviously, the more time had gone by. And this particular study comes from Iran, where they have actually done a comparison between 84 COVID patients and 105 controls. And what they did is they did the semen analysis every 10 days. So from the time of detection of COVID positive, they kept doing it every 10 days till about 60 days. So you had the change in the semen parameters over a span of 60 days. And they looked at the basic sperm parameters, the sperm concentration, the motility, morphology, amount of DNA fragmentation. They then looked at the ROS levels and the antioxidative stress markers, antioxidative markers. They looked at inflammatory markers, and they looked at apoptosis markers. So primarily looking at the enzyme caspase. So you can see that they did a complete study looking at all the systems, so-called systems that SARS-CoV-2 affected, primarily the immune system and also the Siemens analysis. And their results post-infection are something which is quite of concern. So if we look at the sperm concentration, so these lines are, the dark lines are in the infected people, and these are the controls. And you can see the baseline that is the sperm concentration was much lower in the infected patients, and even after 60 days, there doesn't seem to be a much change in the sperm concentration. And if you look at obviously the number of sperms, total sperm count, yes, there is a very gradual improvement in 60 days. So one needs to see what happens after a period of time, because that means if an individual is suffering from male infertility, has got COVID, then there is a likelihood that we may need to postpone treatment for a long period of time, repeat the analysis, and then go. Because there's no point in doing a ART treatment when there is a likelihood of their semen being compromised. When they looked at motility also, they found that the motility in these infected patients was much lower, and even the morphology, everything was highly compromised as compared to those who were not infected. So this is clearly indicative that it does affect the male reproductive system. Then they looked at the ACE2 activity in the seminal plasma. And as you can see, the ACE2 activity in the infected group was very, very high. So it sort of explains that possibly there is a likelihood that in the infected group, because of the high ACE2 activity, there was a corresponding decline in the sperms. However, the good part is that over a span of 2 months, there was a gradual decrease in ACE2 activity in the infected group. So yes, there seems to be some improvement. One would need to see how long it takes for that to be comparable to the normal group. Then they went on to look at the oxidative stress markers, primarily the reactive oxygen species. And here you find that these oxidative stress markers are high, but again, they have gradually started decreasing over a period of time as compared to the control. So it explains that because of the high ROS levels, we know oxidative stress is detrimental and can affect sperm motility, morphology, and most it would affect the sperm DNA integrity. And if you look at the antioxidative markers, so when you look at superoxide dismutase, what they found was that the superoxide dismutase was again much, much lower in the infected group as compared to the controls. And there also, over the period of days, there is a slight marginal improvement. So again, both these together, so possibly with the ROS declining and SOD improving, maybe the overall oxidative stress would decrease over a period of time. However, this is the study which was done for 60 days, and I am looking forward to the subsequent reports from this particular group to see what happens to these patients over a period of time. I mean, I'm sure it would have been great to see the report after, say, 3 months or 4 months after a spermatogenic cycle is over, but I'm sure that they would have wanted to publish it much sooner rather than wait for a period of 5 to 6 months to see what the outcome is. And then one looked at the apoptotic markers, and if you look at those, and they did tunnel, and when you find, which is helping us understand the DNA integrity, again, you can see that there is a lot of DNA fragmentation as detected by the tunnel assay. And again, with time, it is decreasing. So as expected, because if we have high ROS level and low superoxide dismutase level with a high amount of oxidative stress, we would anticipate that there would be an effect on the DNA integrity, and one definitely finds it here. And if we look at the different apoptotic markers, we find again that their levels are high, but after about 20 to 30 days, they start reducing. And that is primarily seen with caspase 3 activity as well as caspase 9 activity. So overall, it does appear that, first that there would be a decline in the apoptotic markers, then there would be a decline in the oxidative stress, then possibly we would see a change in the sperm parameters. So this, according to me, was a very, very interesting study. And then later they went to look in at the interleukin levels or all the inflammatory markers. And here also you see the inflammatory markers. And we do know that in COVID, the inflammatory markers are in fact one of our tests to detect the progression of the disease. So here too, you can, if you're looking at the inflammatory markers in semen, you see that it's much, much higher. We don't even need a statistical test to see the difference that is there. Whether we look at interleukins, whether it's interleukin 8, interleukin 1 beta, or interleukin 6, interleukin 10, in all these cases, you find that the levels of these interleukins is very high, and then it starts decreasing over the days. And again, if you look at the other inflammatory markers like TNF alpha, TGF beta, or interferon, those two are higher, but not as much as we would seeing with the interleukin. So all in all, it tells us that what we see in the systemic situation with higher levels of inflammatory markers, higher levels of oxidative stress, higher incidence of apoptosis, we see that in the semen sample also in men infected with COVID. So this is, I would say, one of the, because the earlier studies looked at very small number of patients, they looked at them for a very small period of time. But this particular paper actually looks at things over a period of days. And then and comparing them with controls at the same period of times gives us a very clear picture of possibly what could be happening. So this is quite, I would say, very complete, thorough study published in the journal Reproduction. Then what is its impact on sperms and the quality of embryos? And this is a case report which has in fact come from India, from Hyderabad. And in this particular case, what the clinic did was that they would do a repeat pickup, and then they were planning to do the embryo transfer. So this is pre-COVID, where this is, you can see the semen analysis and the concentration of sperms and the quality of sperms and the quality of embryos. Then after the individual had COVID, and after a month, this was the situation of the semen sample. So you can see there's a drastic change. What was possibly normal has actually become abnormal. And then they looked at the embryos that developed. So in one case, this is the embryo 1 month post-COVID, and you can see the quality of the embryos. The quality of the embryos in the pre-COVID from the same patient were very healthy, but here you start seeing fragmentation. And then 4 months later, you can also see, yes, the embryo is developing, but there's quite a lot of fragmentation in this embryo, clearly indicating that either it is the sperms or even the oocyte. But when the couple, the husband had COVID, this was the situation, clearly reflecting that one needs to give some thought when you're doing fertility treatment in individuals who have been infected. So there was just earlier this year, Fayev et al. Actually did a thorough review of 35 papers. And like I said, there are many confounding factors when they're looking at studies relating to COVID and fertility. Both have so much of variability. So to come to conclusions is very tricky. However, there is certain conclusions can be drawn. And one thing that during the active phase of infection, there is reduced testosterone level, and there is also poor sperm quality. However, one still doesn't know how long it would take for the sperm quality to come back to what it was pre-COVID times. We do not really know whether this effect is transient, but from the preliminary data, it appears to be transient and maybe and reversible. However, there were very small number of patients in which they actually found the presence of the virus in the testis, so that's good news. And there was inflammation, and nearly in 61% of testicular biopsies taken from infected patients, from patients who were infected, and subsequently there was inflammation, and there was viral orchitis also detected, and testicular discomfort was reported in 19% of the patients. So overall, yes, during active infection, there is a poor sperm quality. Probably it is reversing, but we still do not know how long it would take to come back to the pre-infection stage. And inflammatory markers, as we have seen, high levels in semen in this particular study. A review of these papers also indicate that there is a higher level of inflammation in these patients. So if you're going to say that that is the impact, as I've said, on the sperms and the studies on the male reproductive system, what about its impact on the oocyte and embryos? And the concern that we have for the oocyte and embryos is because the ACE2 receptor to which the SARS-CoV-2 binds to enter the human system, we find that the M2 oocytes, the mature oocytes, have the ACE2 gene transcript. So we do know that they are capable, but the oocyte itself is capable of has the genes to synthesize ACE2 receptors, but these are not detected on the cumulus cells or the granulosa cells or the blastocysts. Second thing is that the TMPRSS2 protein was found in all samples, and the mRNA for when I say all samples, it means the oocyte, cumulus, granulosa, and the blastocysts. And the mRNA for the TMPRSS2, the protein, the enzyme which is required for processing of the binding of the virus to the cell, is also detected in blastocysts. So if our cells or the cells have the receptor for binding to the virus or processing the viral proteins, then it becomes a cause for concern. And so as you can see from this study and the subsequent studies by Rajput et al., they found that the granulosa cells and cumulus are least susceptible to the virus, whilst the M2 oocyte, zygotes, and blastocysts are more susceptible as they express both ACE2 and TMPRSS2 receptors. So what this tells us is that maybe as long as the oocyte is surrounded by the cumulus, possibly it's in a little more protected situation than that, I would say, of a denuded oocyte. Now, in this study, which was done in Mumbai at the National Institute for Research and Production, basically they did a mRNA expression of coronavirus receptors and the spike protein processing enzymes like the TMPRSS2. And what they did was to find that at different stages of the embryonic development, right from the zygote stage to the day 7 blastocyst, and to see when were these different proteins being expressed. So these ACE2, BSG, etc. are the receptors for the coronavirus. And as you can see that the ACE2 receptor is present on the zygote. Then it's the average expression decreases, and then a small amount is present on the inner cell mass, and again it's there on the day 5 trophectoderm cells. Again, if we look at the TMPRSS2 or the spike protein processing enzymes, again, you will find that there is not much of expression of these in the early embryonic development, but their levels increase in the day 5 trophectoderm cells and day 6 trophectoderm cells. So clearly indicating that the possible risk of blastocysts being, if the blastocysts get infected, then there is a high theoretical risk of the virus impacting the blastocysts. Now, what effect it has, or like I showed the previous case report from Hyderabad, where they showed that the quality of the embryos are, and the blastocysts is the embryos, they didn't go to the blastocysts, was having a lot of fragmentation. Whether it is because of this, one doesn't know. So this is again concern, when you see these receptors present in the zygote and not as much in the early embryos, 4-cell stage, but not in the morula or 8-cell, and then again on the trophectoderm. So does it mean that at least during the pandemic, we should be doing early transfers and not going for blastocysts? Whether it would is something we need to give some thought about. But of course, this is applicable only when the individual is infected. So even if today we say that there is a high, when we had our recent situation where we had a very high spike in the number of cases across the country and some parts of the country being much higher, we do know that the percentage of population being infected is very, very small. So considering that, we can't really come down to say we are not going to be doing any kind of treatments despite all these kind of studies, because it's only when the individual is infected that all this comes into play. And also in a very a report which has just come in last week in Fertility Sterility, where they tried to determine when New York has had its highest number of cases, last year when they had this surge of cases, they tried to compare the surge or the number of cases in New York City versus the number of positive cases that they detected in an ART clinic. And they did find that, yes, when there was the peak, during that week, they had more cases in patients who were undergoing ART and, over instimulation, and they found they were positive. However, the number of cases that they actually detected in absolute numbers was not so high. So yes, I mean, each patient is important. And, even if, say, It's a very small percentage who actually get infected. It is concerned, but at the same time, we cannot consider totally delaying treatment for all the patients. So it seems like, if there is a spike in cases in a particular town or a city, then it makes sense to slow down treatment of ART. And when things get back to, say, near normal, or we don't have the spikes, then maybe treatment can continue. So when we are talking and whether this infection is transmitted through ART, they have found that when we use stringent laboratory criteria, there is no detection of the virus in follicular fluid, culture medium, or vitrification medium. So even if the women, they found that even if they were positive by RT-PCR, but if they have used stringent laboratory conditions, they did not detect the virus in any body fluids. So there is, a fear of transmitting the disease through ART doesn't seem to be possible, at least with the preliminary data that comes in. On the other hand, there's also this whole thing of should we delay treatment, and whether that would impact, because that's how we prioritized in the early phases of the pandemic. This is an interesting paper which shows that in women over 40, our AMH 0.5, less than 0.5, means basically all these women with diminished ovarian reserve, when they delay treatment, I'm sorry, it is not ours, it stays by 50 days. uh, you know, uh, so in one group, the treatment was given immediately, that is within 15 days, and the other day it was delayed to about 128 days for whatever reasons. They found that there was no difference in the outcomes in terms of live birth rate, whether the treatment was delayed or whether it was given immediately, and whether the age was on the higher side or they had low AMH. A delay of 50 to 60 days did not make that much difference. So it shows that, yes, if you were, even in this age group of women with a poor ovarian reserve, even if we delayed the treatment by about 2 months, it's not going to create that drastic a difference in the outcomes. So finally, I feel that the decision whether to go ahead with treatment needs to be taken by the couple in consultation with the clinic. Finally, it has to be their decision. And also what needs to be done is to determine that we cannot have a generic kind of decision for the entire country. It will need to be dependent on the situation where the patients are undergoing treatment. So if we have a spike in a particular period of time, then we may need to slow down. So I would say that, it is not really practical to delay treatment. It cannot be that, generically we say, okay, come to a standstill. I mean, that would be very foolish, and that's not being done. It's for the patients to decide. And yes, if any of the partner is positive, then it is better to delay treatment, especially with this studies on the impact on the semen parameters. Maybe check semen quality after 2 to 3 months, so that we give the best possible outcome to the couple. And in female, we also have this concern of thrombotic risks that come in because of the concerns with the the side effects, or I would say, of COVID beyond the respiratory system. And when one does an ART, well, the question is all precautions need to be taken, and whether one should go in for IVF and not ICSI if possible, because there are cases where we don't really need ICSI. So whether that would make, it's a question that is still open-ended. We don't really know, because that's based on uh, the detection of mRNA and the markers of the receptors, as well as the spike protein processing enzymes. And if we are doing the cryopreservation, whether one should proceed to blastocyst or during this time stick to cleavage stage. Again, we are questioning the potential effect on the outcomes, because obviously we're going to go to blastocyst, we're going to get better outcomes in terms of pregnancy rates. But these are things that need to be kept in mind, and maybe we hope to get some more data coming in over the next few months will give us a clearer picture. But finally, I think it's finally the decision of the patients. One needs to counsel them, and then it is their decision what they would like to go ahead with the treatment or not. So with this, I would say, yes, the SARS-2 virus can infect the reproductive system and affect fertility. We don't know whether it's transient. It appears so from the trends that are, but we still don't know. And the receptors to the viral proteins and the protein processing enzymes are present in the Sertoli and Leydig cells, oocytes, as well as blastocysts. We still have no clear idea on the association of the intensity of infection the symptoms and its effect on the reproductive system. And finally, I think all the decisions pertaining to fertility and fertility treatment needs to be taken on individual basis, depending on the patient profile, the location, and counseling, and also the other history of the patient beyond the infertility. So this is what I needed to share of what little information I have gathered on this subject, and happy to take any questions. Yes.
Thank you very much, madam. Thank you very much. That was an excellent eye-opener session. Actually talking on a topic in which the whole world has only very minimal, data is actually a tough job. And I think you did it with real ease and you aced the session. And thank you for cramming up all the available evidence up to date. And to sum up, I think the impact of COVID on male reproductive system is seemingly really more adverse than that of the female, and it also has its impact on the zygote. And now we have the webinar forum open to questions. Audience can please feel free to either post their questions on the chat box, or we will take it up, unmute yourself, and you can ask the questions to the speaker too.
Can I ask?
Please, ma'am.
Can I ask? Rajvi, absolutely wonderful. I think you should go ahead and do a publication of this as a review paper of all you have beautifully summarized and beautiful observation. But then the list goes on because it's never ending. It's a continuing battle. And then what is one thing is extremely clear from all this is protect your health, follow a good lifestyle, keep yourself stress-free. Another thing is follow up. I have been telling this to all my youngsters, my colleagues, follow up. So follow up has to be continuous. Then only it will throw highlight and much more things. So as you are presenting, few things popped up into my head, which I've jotted down also. So you have rightly answered about ICSI, whether it should be avoided. That came to my mind. I was just thinking about, because of this lockdown period and all that, there are reports of spontaneous pregnancies among infertile couples, as well as spontaneous pregnancies among non-infertile couples also. So I am just, in my mind, I was thinking, see, there is no social distancing when you're talking about pregnancies which are happening. So the thing is leave alone the sexual transmission. What about the other thing? The aerosol, the saliva has been known to contain, and then there is no social distance or respiratory route transmission. So everything is very possible. So that made me think that there are pregnancies happening everywhere. So are we in for another big wave? So which I was trying to see whether it is happening, whether it is going to happen. That's one thing, one fear in me. Second thing is, there are also reports of children. This wave is going to come, already happening in children. And it's happening in some parts of India also, in some everywhere and there. So when I'm thinking about the children and the young adults we are going through this infection, is it going to be a long toll later on their fertility profile? And what's happening, leave alone the morbidity of this illness itself, what will happen to the future fertility? And is there because when I search through to see the papers, anything happening with the concerns about this, in the pediatric age group or in the other young adults, I didn't see anything which is cropping up. So is that a concern that we should be even now thinking about it? So that's one thing I talked about it. And then how long you raised a point, how long the virus is going to have thing. So pre-symptomatic, asymptomatic, a lot of people. So we don't know yet. So that's to be answered later on. So these are the things which I was thinking in my mind. And I would also welcome the co-chairperson president of their data, whether they have done anything, whether they observed anything. So of your personal thing also, I would welcome. So Rajvi, these are my concerns. Can't hear you. I think you'll have to unmute.
You have to unmute, please.
Unmute,
Yeah,
Rajvi.
sorry. Yeah. No, basically there's not any data coming on the young adults. So we don't really know what's happening. Also, even the productive because the studies, as you see, some of them have taken a wide range of individuals. So we don't know whether what was their fertility status. So there's lots that needs to be known. But you are absolutely right. There is a lot of anecdotal, conversations on of the many infertile couples actually with, maybe not a very severe infertility have conceived during the pandemic. So yeah, that is something, and most of the pregnancies have been uneventful. Of course, most of them would have taken utmost care, or possibly were locking themselves in. So if, and again, it's also the percentage of population that is really infected. So I think it's just time will tell us what exactly is happening with this
Okay.
kind of.
Okay.
So that's what I think. I mean, nobody really knows what's going to happen.
And young adults, if you're just concerned about their future fertility, should we think of fertility preservation in them?
But then
Because
how
we are
many,
still not sure about the transmission via semen or testicular tissue, so we don't know. So should that be another thing to be?
But so far, there is no, even in the heavily infected people, they have not detected the virus in semen so far. So we really don't know whether it's, going to have an impact, or are we seeing something like mumps going to happen in future, like childhood mumps and impact on fertility. So we really don't know about that. But at least during the first wave or last year, we didn't have that many children or young adults being infected that we've seen now.
Yeah,
But,
second wave is
yeah, we're
happening.
seeing
Yeah.
relatively a little more than earlier. But apart from that, we don't know. But then
And
how
the
many are
gonad,
we going to do? I mean, will it make sense to really start preserving, because this is, some people may have a very transient
yeah,
symptomatic
this
kind
is,
of
I mean,
thing.
taking it too much. I mean,
Yeah.
stretching it too much. I was thinking about it, but then future, say probably another 2 day, 1 decade or something later on, when these men come, whether this, because they are the people who are going to face the thing. I may not even be there. So I was just thinking about all these things. And
Actually, I'm quite keen on looking at that Iranian data if they publish it after a few more months, because the trend that they're showing at the end of 2 months is improving. So possibly if it just reverses, then all our concerns will be futile. I mean, would be untrue. So that would be good.
okay. Okay. Yeah, that's something like a silver lining. Yes.
Yeah, that's the silver lining to that study.
Yeah.
So
We do have some questions for you, madam. Dr. Angelo Mariam has asked, can we give the same antioxidants to these male COVID, post-COVID patients, just like we give it for normal male fertility patients?
basically, see, I wouldn't be the right person, since I am not the one who prescribes drugs, to really answer on this. But I would, in this particular case, I think it's in infection, there's a natural reversal that is taking place. We should wait and see. But I would leave it to Dr. Radha Pandian and Dr. Pandian to maybe comment on this, whether, we should hasten this process of recovery by giving antioxidants.
Radha ma'am, your opinion on this, ma'am?
Just unmuted myself. Antioxidants as such have, in my opinion, they have no role for anybody for that matter, even for infertile patients or healthy patients. So what are the natural antioxidants available in fresh fruits and vegetables? They should be encouraged rather than any supplements. In fact, some antioxidants are proven to be toxic and they in fact dangerous also. Some patients with lung cancer have done very, very badly with antioxidants. So there is no role for antioxidant supplementation in anybody, leave alone COVID patients. So I do not support the view of, in fact, there have been a cocktail of things which have been given in the beginning, name from A to Z. I have seen things posted up in all the social media on what are the things to be given for this COVID patients, house quarantine, such a long list of drugs and all that. Ultimately, I feel there's nothing works excepting oxygen and ventilation if there is something need for that. So I do not believe, probably blood thinners if necessary later on. So I am of the strong opinion that these drugs are, given the situation, does not. So I would not vote for antioxidant in this patients at all.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you so much. And we have the second question from Dr. Lata. I think she missed the first part of the webinar. So she would like to know, should we avoid fertility treatment at all during the COVID times?
No, I don't think so. We need to take a decision depending on the situation and in that case and what is the possible risk of that individual getting infected. So we can't be postponing treatment for sure. We need to take decision based on the situation there. Because even if I'm giving you all this baseline data, it is not that every person is going to go through that.
Correct.
So with all proper caution, we can continue with treatments, or we are continuing with treatments, I would say.
Yes, that's right.
And
So
we
then
should also keep in mind that, some of these data, because people, sometimes they're very high fever. So what we are saying may be something as insignificant as being an outcome of the high temperatures for over a period of days.
Yeah.
So it may have nothing to do with SARS-CoV-2 for all you know. It could be something as, they have sustained high temperature for a period of week, 10 days. So maybe is this just a simple outcome of that? And, we are reading too much into it. That is also a possibility.
Yeah. And then try to vaccinate. I would say vaccinate.
Yes.
And then post-vaccination, enter the thing. That's if that is possible. But then paucity of vaccines and then this, I don't know, that's a different thing altogether. But then I would say vaccinate and then proceed.
Thank you, ma'am. So the next question is from Dr. Ananta Lakshmi, who is asking if any acute viral illness has an effect on the semen parameters. And so, is it right to conclude with the short-term effects, or should we follow up them at a later period also?
I think one should just follow up and take a call at that point of time. It's as and especially since we're seeing more effect on the male, it's also much easier to assess. And then take a call if things are normal, then there is no need. And if the individual is healthy and has no other COVID complications, then there is no that it should be okay to continue with treatment. So it will all depend on how badly they were affected. So it's not just being positive, because there are so many people who are going along with just being RT-PCR positive, but having absolutely no symptoms. So, I mean, why should we deprive them of treatment if they're fine after a period of time? In fact, they may be in a healthier state for some point of time because of the, the immune response that they have developed. So we can take a call, I think, individually.
Right. So another question pops up from Dr. Angelo. What is the interval between the vaccination and the treatment? Probably the fertility treatment or assessment of the semen analysis again.
I think I don't see any reason why it should affect semen analysis, why vaccine should have any impact on the reproductive system, at least. So I guess one can go ahead as planned.
Yeah. She's talking about resuming fertility services after vaccination. I think that's what she means.
Yeah. I see no problem in resuming it, after the span of, say, week, 15 days. I don't see any problem with that, because I don't expect vaccination.
So, yeah, it's about 3 weeks after second vaccination. That should be the thing. That's when the antibody levels are built up. So you can safely undergo. And so that's what the general guideline is.
Yes. And the next question also says about the same. When should we start treatment after vaccination? That's from Dr. Harihara.
So I think ma'am has already answered that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, any fertility treatment after vaccination can be started 3 weeks post. That's according to the guidelines. So that answers the question. And Radha ma'am, I just wanted to have an idea from you as well as Dr. Rajvi that pre and post testicular volume assessment in male fertility patients who have been trying for their fertility and have had an episode of COVID infection, would that help us to know, will that help us in the long term to get an idea if that's really leading to orchitis or any temporary abnormality?
Rajvi, would you like to answer that?
See, that particular study also talked about low semen volume, but I don't recollect reading anything where there is an alteration in the testicular volume. But I don't know whether Dr. Radha has.
This is orchitis. During orchitis, there will be definitely more of edema, and there will be some amount of the volume will be more only. So, but then It doesn't, unless, see, the volume is made up of, the volume of the testis is made up of bulk of the seminiferous tubules. So unless there is atrophy, total atrophy of the seminiferous tubule, volume is unlikely to shrink and come to a very, very undetectable, very low levels. So should not make any difference as far as she has shown in the Iran follow-up. The signs of recovery after some few years, about 60 days or something, she showed the graph. So the signs of recovery are there. So you have to follow up. Post means when are you doing the post? So pre, when are you cannot anticipate the person is going to get infected. So you have a baseline. If you have a baseline reference and the patient has fallen sick with COVID, and when are you going to test the volume? Is it you're going to take immediately after recovery, or you're going to wait for some 6 to 8 weeks after the thing? So it depends upon when you're going to measure. And I don't think this, as she said, the volume is not going to alter much. Even semen analysis, unless you have a repetitive, seminal, there is inherent variation in a man's semen analysis profile also. So unless we have multiple readings at with 2 to 3 months intervals, and you have multiple readings, you cannot say this is the effect. That is why I was even thinking, if a person is, because if you don't know the baseline value, if is already in the severe oligoastheno range, or if is already azoospermic, if you just land up and telling all the severe oligo or azoospermia is because of COVID, it is unfair.
Right.
So we don't know the baseline value. We don't know what he was previously. So unless we have all these things, there's no point in judging. This is the rampage of COVID on the testes and all that. So it is difficult to see. We need a really long-term and really clear detailed study. Unless otherwise, it's very difficult to judge the after effect. So it probably, maybe 2022, Rajvi, like this same year, Rajvi will give another presentation. So in that, she can summarize what she did in 21, and then she can extrapolate to 22. She will be in a better position to guide you all as to what has happened then.
Yeah,
So
maybe by that time we should have some data from India also, because
yeah.
So
that is why it's important for you to have the publications and things to be made very transparent. So that is why it will help.
Yeah. Sir, Pandian sir, can I also ask what's your opinion on this, sir? What do you think about the testicular volume? Madam had answered her view. Sir?
We cannot hear him. He is not, video is not there.
Madhu, I think you have to attend to the questions on the Q&A first.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. We'll do that. We'll do that right away. I will be doing that. And we have some questions from the audience as well.
Please go ahead. Let me reserve my comments to the last.
Sure, sure, sir.
Yeah.
Sure. And Dr. Shanti Ilango, question is freezing the semen sample advisable for the couples who are already under our care?
well, if you're anyway planning on ART, I do believe that we should keep a backup sample. In any case, I'm of the opinion to keep a backup sample when they're planning an ART in general, irrespective. So maybe we are just doing it a little early. So, I mean, I know there are people who do not agree to keeping a backup, but in these times, we don't know when what's going to happen. So we keep a backup sample and we may or may not use it.
So the next question is from Rangalakshmi madam, who is asking, is there a role for termination of pregnancy if a woman conceives soon after the COVID infection? Do we have to take up that role?
I would pass it on to Dr. Radha.
Yeah.
She's the right person to answer this. I can't answer.
I won't advise. For the sake of termination of pregnancy, I won't advise, because pregnancies have happened and people are following that
so
newborns.
many.
There is no vertical transmission and no abnormal, excepting increased risk of slightly increased risk of preterm labor and some miscarriages. It has not been proven beyond doubt that there is a definite impact. So they say a lot of reports are there saying, encouraging reports are, they do, as well as other ladies who have not been exposed to COVID. So I definitely, termination does not arise in one's mind.
It's too harsh.
Yeah. What other things?
The next question from Vijay Lakshmi madam, she's asking, she's appreciating that it was a very lucid presentation. Thank you. So she would like to know when a couple can go in for a FET post the COVID infection? Is there a specific time limit before they go ahead with frozen embryo transfer post the COVID infection?
I think you would again go back to the, if you're saying vaccines 3 weeks, you would at least give it a couple of months before you do a post-COVID. That's would be my opinion. But again, if the patient does get pregnant, what are the possible, and we've already been discussing that there are so many natural pregnancies occurring. So maybe post-COVID, again, when we're talking of COVID, we're talking it in a very generic term, but in reality, there's such a wide range. So I think it would be more individualized. I don't think we can generalize in this particular case. So if you're going to do an FET in a post-COVID, I would rather wait for some time and see that there are no post-COVID complications coming in and then go for a transfer rather than do it immediately. Because it's not going to make a big difference if you delay it by 2 to 3 months. You have the embryos and they're doing well, and so why take a chance and put it in earlier? Just that would be our view.
Yeah.
Okay. And sir, we would like to know your opinion now before we have any further questions.
Opinion on what, Madhupriya, specifically?
We were actually talking about if after post-COVID infection, whether doing a testicular volume before and after in a COVID patient who has had a COVID infection, will that be helpful? Like viral orchitis, which may lead to a decrease in the testicular volume, will that be helpful?
Okay, okay.
One of the personal questions which has come to my mobile. So.
Yeah, okay, sure. Testicular volume per se does not correlate with the semen parameters. So I would not be concerned. If the patient has viral orchitis, as Dr. Radha said, then certainly you would be concerned about whether the orchitis is producing an atrophy of the testis. But otherwise, I don't think the testicular volume per se is mad, because we have quite large volume testes with azoospermia and 8 ml testes with normozoospermia. So volume does not equate with sperm parameters. So I would not be concerned about it at all. And have a few more minutes to talk about, in general, about the wonderful talk. Can I take some more time? A few more minutes? Okay.
Please.
No, I think this was a wonderful talk. Rajvi gave an excellent talk.
Thank you.
But as always, I have a lot of questions and reservations about the whole scenario now. We are in a stage where everybody seems to know something, but nobody seems to know anything for sure. Its initial days, it was like the blind leading the blind. Now it's like the one-eyed man leading the rest of the, in a world of blind people, one-eyed man is the king, that's the say. We remember, I think virus is our foreparents. I don't know how many of you to accept that. If you believe in evolution, virus are foreparents. They learn to survive no matter how careful you are. But the only way is to make sure that we follow all common prescriptions we had earlier. Earlier days, I'm talking of before all these things happened. Let's say 50 years back, with this viral infection, isolation was the first thing we did. Whether it's a smallpox, chickenpox, or whatever pox, or any other viral infection, the people are isolated. Somehow today we feel that everybody has got every right to do whatever they want. And that's where the problem starts. And this whole thing was a knee-jerk reaction. When the epidemic broke out, the whole world closed down, as Rajvi beautifully said. Why they closed down? Nobody said at that time the woman should not get pregnant on her own naturally. And there's a pandemic. If you fear that the pandemic is going to affect the baby, I think that should be the advice. We never advise couple not to get pregnant. In fact, we do that all the time when there is a rubella infection. We tell that, avoid conception, but we didn't do this. Again, why we opened up is primarily because of pressure from the patients. And infertile patients, for them, every month counts. The pressure was so much. Like what we do, we did it in India because world over they closed down, and we opened again because world over they opened up. They opened up elsewhere because there's a lot of pressure on the patient. And there is still a lot of hokum and flim-flam as far as COVID-19 is concerned. You all know that very well. We had so many drugs, starting with hydroxychloroquine. Then so many drugs came and went, and we still do not know. Are we going to leave from one pandemic to another pandemic? Because this virus is not new. Viruses have always been there all the time. We just cannot go on like this. I think basically, I think we have to work on what kind of virus is this? Does the sisters of the virus, you can't have produced any other problem? It's a coronavirus. Have coronavirus produced any congenital illness so far? If it is not done, then there's no logic in doing it. In fact, the same question came about vaccination. At that time, I'm talking about a few months back, I was the only idiot saying that you must vaccinate the pregnant woman. All of this said, I'm talking about people whom I rang up, and they said, no, you can't give vaccination. We do give vaccination in pregnancy. And this vaccine is not the live virus. The only contraindication is the live virus. Rubella, we tell the patient to have rubella vaccination and ask them to avoid conception for 4 weeks. Where this is a not live virus at all. So why were we reacting to it? And what happens to those patients who got infected in the interim? So I think we have to have a very realistic opinion about these things and not get a knee-jerk reaction saying that, no, let's close down, let's open up again. And one more thing is 7th picture is very, very, very unpredictable. By nature, it varies. I think Raji had a beautiful paper. I think we need to wait for some more time. Again, it did not say there has been a low value. We do not know what is the value before that. And as somebody pointed out in the audience, any fever can lead to a drop in the 7th picture. Any fever. And is it because of the fever? From what literature she produced, again, there is no evidence of orchitis or any other incident. So I would think that it's not likely that COVID-19 is going to affect the testis in any big way. It can happen once in a while in any patient. And COVID-19 is a systemic disease, predominantly affection of the respiratory system. Again, oocyte and spermatozoa are isolated. They're not exposed to the vascular tree at all or to the blood supply until they come out. And once they come out, you're going to use them. If it's IVF or ICSI, they're going to be in a different media. So I think there is no reason for concern at all as far as infertility treatment is concerned. But the question is, does coronavirus, COVID-19, affect the pregnancy? And I think we have enough data now. A lot of women have delivered. Yes, acute viral infection can lead to preterm labor. Beyond that, there is no obvious evidence that it's going to affect the baby in any way. And again, a lot of things are only knee-jerk reaction. The presence of the ACE protein does not mean anything at all, because after all cells would have all the proteins necessary. But why should you do an IV and not ICSI? Again, there's no reason for it all. Why cleavage stage? Why not blastocyst? Again, I think they're all just assumption. No, the important question comes in practical pointers. Tomorrow a patient comes to your clinic. Do we do a COVID testing for all the patients routinely now? Or don't we do it? I have no advice on this. And if they're COVID negative, do we send them back to have COVID vaccination and then come back for treatment? And that same question somebody asked, how late after the vaccination can you start them for treatment? Again, these are early days. I don't think anybody has got a definitive answer. Anybody's answer is as good as anybody else's answer. But I would think these are difficult questions to answer. I'll leave it to the other members of the panel or the audience to react on all these comments. Thank you very much.
One more thing which I would like to add is, you are talking about the male and female patients who are coming for the treatment. What about the staff? Are you or the doctors, nurses who are handling embryologists, are they getting tested repeatedly, periodically? So this is one thing which is, I don't know whether it is should be a rule or whether it should be left to the center to decide. What about your comment, Raji, on this? No.
Ma'am, your audio.
Unmute.
Please.
I don't know how practical would this be. I mean, you can be tested today and then again, so whether you're symptomatic or, I mean, it was fine in the early days when you could, you were doing contact tracing, but now, I mean, contact tracing is just out of question. I mean, how practically is it possible? So, I mean, it's very difficult to say whether we should keep testing. At least that's my opinion now.
So the frontline warriors, they don't need testing at all?
No, I think most of the frontline warriors are possibly vaccinated by now and had the second dose also. So I think a majority of the frontline people would have been vaccinated. So that is one thing, because at least, I mean, the vaccination started in Jan. So most of them would have completed the second dose. So I mean, those, whether we should keep testing them frequently, because you would get infected at any point of time. So I don't know what's the protocol. I mean, you would be better because you work in maybe Dr. Kritika or Dr. Madhupriya.
Yeah, somebody who's in the front line.
Yeah,
I have retired, Rajvi, so I don't know.
I know.
I'm
so
not
I
working
to
anymore.
These people who are actually,
Yeah,
what
actually
they would have
doing.
to say.
because reinfections are possible even after
Yes,
2 doses of
of course.
vaccination.
I totally
We have,
agree
we
with
have
that.
heard a lot of cases. We have seen in our own friends and family friends and relatives. We have heard of cases. It's quite
Post-vaccination,
possible.
true.
Quite possible. Fortunately, in some they are mild. In some they are even progress to severe diseases, and some even pass away. So it is happening even post-vaccination.
True,
So
that's true.
it's so unpredictable. That's why I was thinking you are all in the front line. So what about your protection plus exposure to the patients through you?
Yes, Dr. Kritika, ma'am, do you want to actually add on to the Dr. Kritika, ma'am, you want to add on to the question?
Yeah, one personal experience what I had seen in this last 1 year.
Come on video, Kritika.
Yeah. So this is something personal observation by me. I think I should work on it on a database scientifically. One thing that I've noticed is the increased miscarriage rates compared to the normal times. I find a increase in the miscarriage rates, especially because I'm handling IVF pregnancies. So this is one observation which I want to work on further, and probably with a clear data later.
Yourself periodically or just leave it to
And how
nature,
frequently?
guess.
How frequently would you get tested? I mean, what's the?
No. I think
So
post-vaccination testing is no point at all. Post-vaccination,
unless
you are
I'm
not
not
positive.
Routinely testing anybody, ma'am. Actually,
Should not be testing.
testing all the
No.
staff, and only if post-vaccination, if at all they have had any encounter with the patient, close encounter with the patient, particularly the staff nurses, or if they are family members or relatives or friends whom they have been with, for example, a hostel mates, if they have been found to have COVID, or if they have any symptoms, because the symptoms are really vague for COVID, loose stools, presence of cold, cough, any of these, we tell them to actually take off for a week and test them if they persist to have it beyond 5 days. This is what we have been following post-vaccination schedule.
So what about you? What about you all, doctors?
We've all got vaccinated now, and we are staying safe as far as we know, ma'am. Symptoms, if anyone, staff nurse, doctors, even the front line, the receptionist, whoever is in the hospital, anybody who has a contact history, or if they get to have even post-vaccination, even if they are seemingly asymptomatic, if they have a contact history, or if they have any history of vague symptoms, and that persists for more than 5 days, we tell them to get tested. Not on a regular basis, actually, ma'am.
Physically symptoms or exposure to any positive patient? That's all.
Both. Close exposure to the positive patient as well as contact
Symptoms.
history. Very close people, friends or family who have had symptoms and tested to be positive. And people who have themselves been having symptoms. So these people are told to retest even after post-vaccination, because we find that they have infection. Though it might not go into a serious illness, they are still supposed to be carriers. So we try to prevent them from coming into the patient care. That's what we've been doing now, post-vaccination.
I just saw something popping up about antibodies, test your antibodies, something. So, but then even CDC does not recommend testing the antibodies. They say we won't know how to interpret, which is the normal, even people who are at high risk, like immunodeficient patients, transplant patients and all that, post-vaccination, whether the immunity is declining, they wanted to test. So they started doing themselves, but CDC said, we won't know how to interpret, which is normal, which is low, which is the thing. So that they don't recommend testing the antibodies. So I don't think testing your antibodies is going to be of any help.
Okay,
so,
and
leave it to thing. And anything else, Kritika, and any other?
I think Dr. Lata has given a picture saying even exposure, no need to test unless symptomatic. Just be careful following COVID appropriate behavior. Yeah, madam, this is for people who have been working frontline, because we will be exposing our patients to risk. because though we will not be getting affected, we are in a stage where we can give it in the incubation period to the patient, because we are taking patient care as priority. We think even if they are not symptomatic, if they have a very close contact, we've been doing, probably we'll have to have more exposure on that.
Okay.
So if there are no further questions, we'll end the session. I would like to just give a vote of thanks. Any more questions, Dr. Madhupriya?
There are no further questions as of now, madam. You can carry on. Thank you.
So this session has been really interesting. Thanks to Dr. Rajvi, because she was the one who chose this topic. And this is a burning topic, a gray area where none of us knows the answer, as Dr. Pandian rightly said. So thank you very much for choosing this topic and throwing light with all the current evidences. And I want to thank my chairpersons, Dr. Madhupriya and Dr. Radha Pandian, for sparing their time and making the session very interesting. And each and every one of the audience with their questions and participation had made it very even more interesting. And as always, I thank my guru, Dr. Pandian, for giving his views and guidance. And in the end, I want to thank the Sun Pharma Sonora division for always being with us, for helping with the technical angle, especially Ms. Rashmi, Zapansha, Saroj Kumar, Mr. Rajesh and Kishore. So thank you all. Stay safe till we meet again next month.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rajvi, enjoyed.
Thank
As
you.
usual, very, very eloquent, powerful presentation. You should publish this as a review paper because it is a beautiful thing what you have done. Fantastic. So, and the real beautiful topic you chose, and you are the right speaker for that. So, thank you so much. Thank you so much. You also highlight on the practice of yoga, all these things, which will build up your immunity and stay safe and healthy during this pandemic. So, at all times, even otherwise. So happy to have met all of you. Mikka Nandri, Namaste, Dhanyavad,
Thank
and hope
you.
to see
Thank
you
you.
again. Hope to see
Thank
you
you,
all
sir.
again.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.